Finally, shading. If we have chosen the light direction, we have chosen the colors, and we have started to draw something. Let's say this rock here. If we want to add some more details to a featureless surface, then we use shading. And pixel art shading is everything because we are working with very limited number of pixels. So even 10 or 15 pixels in a specific color or a specific pattern can make a difference between, let's say, as we saw in the previous one, something that is pure made of stone or something that's made of metal or something that's made of cloth. And we're going to see that when we start drawing assets as well. We use shading to show us, as I said, different materials. Depending on what kind of feeling you want for your game. Let's say if you want a more modern looking game, then you use full shading as we see here in the rocks. If we want to replicate something that is more from the 80s, when there was even less colors to work with, we can use Dittering. Dittering is when you just mix and match color patterns to indicate, for example, different shades of gray, as we can see here. So we can say, okay, this is very much more brighter, then this goes a bit darker, a bit more darker, and until we get to black. And as we can see, we only use two colors, but then we can visualize a lot of steps of brighter and darker stops. Again, with shading, we can create stuff like occlusion, safe occlusion, like for example here with the rock. We can see that this part here is in the back, bumps, holes, and other stuff. It's used together with the light direction, so we can figure out from where the light comes. And the most important thing that I would say here, especially when you're making assets for your game, is that you need to figure out how much shading you would need. Because too little shading, like here, everything kind of looks flat, kind of looks boring. If you have too little shading in your foreground and background, then players are not going to understand what they're seeing. But on the other hand, if you go too much into detail like this, then it becomes hard to replicate. You can put this much detail in something in the background, for example, something that doesn't move. But if you put so much detail in your character, then when you want to animate him, when he moves, then all these details need to move with him. That means that for each small movement of a hand or his head, then you need to animate all of this. Then that becomes very complicated very fast. Finally, I want to talk about some of the things that we are going to see when we start drawing, the steps that we take. So we start with something like a very boring shovel. This shovel, we can't understand a lot what's happening here. What is this material made of? What is this material made of? We don't know. We don't understand also, is it a curved shovel? Is it a completely non-curved one? But once we start adding shading here, very small amounts, as you can see, just a bit of yellow, a bit of white here, a bit of yellow here, a bit of darker colors here, a bit of brighter colors here, we start to understand, okay, this part, this is metal, because it has some bright reflective parts. Oh, this part here most probably is either wood or maybe something plasticky because it doesn't have that much highlights. But we can also see that this part is above this part because we have some shadows here. And this part goes in this part because again we have some shadows. Again, with this one we start to understand, oh, maybe this one is curved because this part is darker than this one. And then if we want to go even further, we can add some smaller details, making the shovel look even more curved, even more dirty, for example. So we can see how easy it is to make something that's very boring and flat into something that is much more visually interesting. And finally, one thing that I'm going to talk about constantly while we start sketching is that you have to create in pixel art symmetry in shape. For example, here with this chest, everything is symmetrical, as we can see. But asymmetry in shading and color, meaning that we make something boring here, but then we can add all the particulars, all the interesting parts with little touches of shading, a bit of pixels here, a bit of pixels there. Then we straight away understand that this thing is not just made out of plastic or something. This is made out of wood. This wood has been worn out because this chest has been sitting in a dungeon for years. And again, some practical examples. We can see here from, if you haven't played this game, try it out. It's absolutely amazing. But you can see here how much we can see from just the little shading in the terrain. We can understand that the terrain, for example, is toxic, but on top of it, there is something that's either slime or poison. In the background, we can see that just little touches. It's very much easy to understand that we're in a jungle, most probably. And again, here we can see the menus. They very much pop out because they're very differently lit compared to the game itself. Again, Shovel Knight. This could have been quite busy and not understandable, but because we have a light direction that is, at least to some extent, they try to get, because even here we can see that the light comes from this side, but for the mountains it comes from this side, so it's not completely 100% even, but even then we can understand what's happening. And it's the same here, that the light direction is coming from this way. So you can get away with some stuff, but as long as you're more or less consistent with it, you can get some very nice results. Very easily understandable that these are houses, these are icons, and so on. Finally, another example here. This is a modern take of Streets of Rage. Even with something that's has so much chunky pixels, you can get so much out of just adding a bit of dithering to give to the player an understanding that the pavement is directed this way. You can get so much out of the background with some color differences. Here, for example, we wanted to have some colors that are popping out, that are kind of in your face, because we wanted to show that this is most probably some kind of books in the background. You can see the cell phones and so on. So it really depends on what you want to do from your game, but as long as you stay consistent, then everything is going to be all right.